What about the chronic disease epidemic? That's even a bigger problem, because we're now spending, when my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60%. We spent, when my uncle was president, about 4% of GDP on healthcare costs. Today, it's around 20% and climbing. The biggest cost is chronic disease. $4.3 trillion a year that we're spending on chronic disease. And who's making money from that? The pharmaceutical companies. And who owns all those pharmaceutical companies? Yeah, BlackRock. Oh, and those pharmaceutical companies are causing it with, some of the bad medicines they give us, and then they're reaping the harvest of all that chronic disease. But also the processed food companies. The processed food companies, which bought up the tobacco companies, Kraft went to work for Philip, became a subsidiary of Philip Morris, et cetera. And they brought 10,000 scientists, many of them from the tobacco industry, to make processed foods addictive and to make them so that they don't fill you. And we now have 1,000 ingredients in our processed foods in this country that are illegal in Europe. Is it any wonder that we have a chronic disease epidemic in this country? And who owns all of those processed food companies? BlackRock. And who is one of the biggest owners of both the Republican and Democratic Party? Right? So they're not allowed to solve that problem. They're not, because there are people making money on that problem who are giving them money. And that's one of the reasons they needed to get me out of the Democratic Party. That's one of the reasons they needed to get Bernie Sanders out of the Democratic Party. Oh, and this is, we're now spending more on diabetes than we do on our entire military budget. When I was a kid, when my uncle was president, a typical pediatrician saw one diabetes case in his entire lifetime. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door has diabetes. And nobody's talking about this. President Trump and President Biden aren't talking about it. They're not going to solve it. They have no way to. They presided over this dramatic increase in it. You will never hear them even discuss it. And yet it's the most important issue in our country, because if we don't solve this problem, our budget is going to be out of control and our kids are all going to be sick. And if we have... Listen, we are a resilient nation. We are resilient. We have terrible problems in this country right now. We have bad food problems, we have bad health problems, we have economic problems, but we also have the capacity to solve those problems. The economic problems are disastrous, but we have the greatest entrepreneurs in this country of any nation in the world. Our farms are getting destroyed from soil depletion and from chemicals and from chemical fertilizers and from nitrogen and phosphorus, or chemical pesticides and herbicides, nitrogen, carbon-based fertilizers. But we also have the best regenerative farming and healthy soil farmers in this country. We're breaking ground on that, and the best people in the world who are doing the most interesting things, and I talk to them every week on my podcast, these extraordinary farmers who are learning ways and developing ways and reinstating ways of preserving the soil, of ending the dependence on chemicals and fertilizers. And don't you want a president who's thinking about that and who's trying to help those farmers transition? And we have a terrible health crisis in this country, but we also have the best integrative medicine doctors, the best functional medicine doctors of any country in the world. Oh, you know, if our country is going to face crises over the next 8 or a decade, and they could be terrible crises. We could see the end of the dollar as the global reserve currency. We could see wars. We can see more pandemics. We can see all of these. You know, we have the resilience in our country and the toughness that we can solve any of these problems. But if you're sick, if you suffer chronic disease, it sucks the energy and the heart and soul out of you and your family. And it's the one thing we need to make sure, no matter what we fumble, no matter what mistakes we make, we've got to make sure that our children are healthy. And neither of these presidents is even thinking about those things. They're not going to solve them. Neither of these presidents is capable of ending the polarization, which is also toxic and existential in our country. We don't know how it's going to end, because not only are we being corralled and pumped to hate each other by our political leaders, by the corporations who are strip mining us, treating us, commodifying our children, our landscapes, our people, our health. Not only that, but we now have these social media algorithms that amplify the hatred and the polarization. And it's impossible for a social scientist or anybody to tell us how this is going to have a good ending unless we take responsibility today for ending that polarization. And that's what this campaign is about. And President Trump and President Biden have no capacity to do that. They are the products of that anger, that hatred, that acrimony, the vilification, the demonization. Those are the tools that they're using to get elected. The fear-mongering. You know, that guy's going to destroy the public. No, that guy's going to destroy the public. And the people who follow them are deplorable, or they're elites or whatever. We have to start thinking about that, thinking that way. We need to start looking at each other and seeing Americans who are concerned, who love our country, and we need to give them the capacity to love our country without hating each other. And President Biden and President Trump are not going to be able to do that because they are the products of this system. They are the ones who are fortifying and amplifying this system of vilification and demonization against each other and their followers. Do you think that President Biden and President Trump, that either of them have either any interest or capacity to restore the ability of the government to start telling the truth to the American people? No, I don't think so either, because they're part of this system where they deny that the government's even lying to us. And I grew up at a time when most Americans could not conceive that the government of the United States would lie to them. The first hint that we had was when I was a little boy. And in 1959, Gary Francis Powers, the pilot, was shot down in a U-2 over Russia. And he had a kit where he was supposed to give himself cyanide and kill himself so that he could never be interrogated or used as an example or displayed. And Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, which was running the U-2 program, which was top secret, told President Eisenhower, the pilot is dead. The plane is in a million pieces. They'll never be able to prove it. So deny that we even have this program. Khrushchev and Eisenhower were about to meet for a summit to end the Cold War in Vienna. And Dulles got Eisenhower to lie to the Americans and to the rest of the world and say, we don't know what you're talking about. There is no U-2 program. And then the Russians produced Gary Francis Power alive. And people in our country looked at each other for the first time and said, oh my God, the government lies to us. It told us a lie. Most people, when my uncle was president, 80% of Americans still believe that the government of the United States always told the truth. And in 1973, the Pentagon Papers came out. The first time we had a history of 20 years of lies that hundreds of government officials had told the American people. And we started thinking it's still unusual, but about certain things, they do lie to us. Today, I don't know if there's anybody left in this country who believes that the government does not lie to you, then you're not paying attention. Because and during COVID, we saw how the media, which at least used to call the government on its lies, that they've become the bullhorn for government propaganda and lies. And that they see their job not as informing the public and exposing those lies and maintaining a constant, fierce posture of skepticism toward the federal government and for other centers of authority, which is what traditionally the press is supposed to do. They now see their job as reinforcing government propaganda and government lies and corporate propaganda. And so all of us, there is no check anymore. And do you think President Trump or President Biden has the inclination, the concern, the capacity to change that system? I can tell you this, that when I become president, the government is going to stop lying to the American people. And I'm going to issue an executive order my first day in office saying that any government official who lies is going to lose their job. And I'm going to give a speech at the National Press Club, re-educating the American media about what his job is in this country, in a democracy, which is not to believe people. Don't even believe me. You shouldn't. We want a democracy in this country, and the job of the press and the democracy is to constantly question, to constantly disbelieve, to examine and parse through every statement by every public official to see whether they're telling their lies. Their job is not to manipulate the public. Their job is not to silence doctors and scientists and mothers of injured children who have a right to tell their story to the public. That's not their job. Their job is to tell the truth, to question everything, to examine everything, and that is the America that I'm going to lead us back to. And do you think President Trump or President Biden has the capacity or the inclination to end the forever wars? No. President Biden clearly does not. President Trump said that that's what he's going to do. But then he brought John Bolton in to run the NSA. And we heard today that he's promised the Secretary of Defense, I don't know that this is true, but I've heard this from his people in his campaign, that he's promised the Secretary of Defense spot to Mike Pompeo. Oh, these are the neocons who are going to continue to run our government and continue to embroil us in these destructive wars that are robbing us, of robbing our children of their future, and are running up the debt, that are making us less safe everywhere in the world, every place. And we have engaged in a war over the past 30 years is worse off today than when we went in there. Every place. And everybody knows it in the world. Everybody knows that we have misused our military power. We squandered it on bad wars that we shouldn't have gotten involved in. And I'm going to end that forever.